So, um, if you look at the actuarial tables right now, a child born today in a developed economy has like a better than 50% chance of living past 100 years old.
Right, which is just wild to think about.
It is. And yet, the entire architecture of our professional lives is still stubbornly built on this mid-20th century blueprint, one that was designed for a life expectancy of about 68.
Yeah, exactly. We're trying to stretch this 30-year industrial career model over a 60-year working horizon.
And the societal fabric is starting to tear because of it. I mean, people are waking up at 35 or 45 or 50, and they're looking at the ladder they've been climbing.
And realizing it's leaning against the completely wrong wall.
Yes. They're staring down the barrel of another 3 or 4 decades of work and just feeling completely trapped by their own past decisions.
Well, the math simply does not support the old model anymore,
I
right?
know, it really doesn't.
Because you have the accelerated pace of technological change. I mean, entire industries are being automated, new sectors are springing up overnight.
And you combine that with the sheer demographic reality of longer lifespans you just mentioned, it means the traditional three-stage life is effectively dead.
That old learn, work, retire paradigm.
Exactly. That old paradigm where you spend your first 2 decades learning, your next 4 decades working in a single trajectory, and then your final years in a neatly pensioned retirement. That's a historical anomaly now. We are entering an era of continuous under-institutionalized transition.
And that is exactly the core tension we're tackling today. So welcome to this deep dive, everyone. Our mission today is to dissect this incredibly dense, just fascinating stack of sources to answer what, might actually be the defining question of the modern economy.
Which is how to navigate all this chaos.
Right. How do you purposefully reinvent yourself and master a nonlinear career? And we are pulling from all over the place for this. We've got academic philosophy, psychological research from Herminia Ibarra, life coaching frameworks from Faith Hill.
Oh, and those great essays on the T-shaped professional. Yes. And some brilliant recent insights from the deep dive on Curious Mike with AI regarding how we actually navigate the messy reality of reinvention.
It really is a phenomenal stack of research because it tackles the transition from so many multiple angles, the economic, the psychological, the philosophical.
We're not just looking at how to tweak a resume here.
No, not at all. We are looking at the fundamental mechanics of identity change.
Exactly. And if you are listening to this right now, I mean, we are speaking directly to you. Whether you're that 30-something feeling inexplicably behind your peers who seem to have it all figured out, or maybe you're a seasoned executive who has reached the top of the corporate ladder only to find out the view is miserable.
Or if you're just paying attention to the AI revolution and realizing, your current job might not exist in 5 years.
Right. This discussion is engineered for you because we're dismantling the myth that a career is a paved highway. It's more like navigating a river. You have to read the currents, not just stare at a map.
Right.
We are going to examine why the nonlinear, seemingly scattered path is actually your greatest advantage.
But to start building that new trajectory, you first have to understand why you're clinging so desperately to your current one.
Yeah, that psychological gravity of the sunk cost fallacy.
Exactly. We have this compelling piece of research from the University of Liverpool that frames the sunk cost fallacy in a deeply visceral way.
How do they define it?
They define it as the dangerous human tendency to let your future self suffer in a futile attempt to please your past self.
Oh, wow. I want to break down the mechanics of that because it sounds almost masochistic when you say it out loud like that.
It really does.
Why do our brains compel us to honor past investments that are actively harming our present?
Well, it comes down to loss aversion, which is just deeply hardwired into our neurobiology. When you invest, say, 10 years into getting a law degree and making partner, or you spend a decade climbing the ranks in corporate marketing, your brain codes that time, effort, and money as a massive expenditure of caloric and social energy.
So walking away from it feels dangerous.
It triggers the exact same neurological pain pathways as losing a physical resource. Your brain is basically screaming that you are throwing away survival tokens.
So instead of evaluating a new opportunity based on its future yield, you make decisions aimed at validating the historical expenditure.
Precisely. You stay in the miserable law firm because leaving means admitting the last 10 years were a waste.
The University of Liverpool research points out a very specific linguistic tell that indicates you're trapped in this cognitive loop too. It's the overwhelming presence of should statements in your internal monologue.
Oh, shoulds. Yes.
Like, I should stick with this field because I spent a fortune on the master's degree. Or, I should stay this agency because I already put in 5 years of 70-hour weeks.
And the moment your career strategy relies on the word should, you are no longer making a rational economic choice.
Right, you're just managing emotional baggage at that point.
So the countermeasure the researchers propose is the establishment of rigid trigger points.
I love this concept. Explain what a trigger point is.
A trigger point is a predetermined objective boundary that forces a rational cost-benefit analysis before the emotional fatigue sets in.
Okay, so like a contract with yourself.
Exactly. You make a contract with yourself while you are in a cold, analytical state to protect yourself from the hot, emotional state you will be in later.
The mechanism there is just fascinating. So you decide today, if I am not promoted to regional director by Q3 of next year, I will actively begin pivoting into project management.
Or if this startup does not hit 20,000 in monthly recurring revenue by December, I will shut it down and look for an enterprise role.
Right, because by setting the threshold in advance, you remove the ego from the equation when the deadline actually arrives.
You aren't quitting because you failed. You are executing a pre-planned strategic pivot based on data.
Which brings us to the essay from Matt Tillman, because the moment you execute that pivot, society often tries to penalize you for it.
Oh, constantly.
There is this pervasive cultural myth that a scattered resume like one that jumps across completely different industries is a red flag for a lack of focus.
And Tillman just completely dismantles this by introducing the concept of the T-shaped professional.
I really want to spend some time on this because it reframes the entire concept of a career detour. A traditional linear worker is I-shaped, right?
Right. They have deep vertical expertise in one single narrow domain.
Yeah, they're the world's greatest supply chain analyst or a hyper-specialized orthopedist. But the T-shaped professional has that deep vertical stem of expertise, but it's capped with a broad horizontal crossbar.
A crossbar of intersecting skills, frameworks, and mental models pulled from completely diverse disciplines.
And the modern economy, which is just defined by complexity and rapid disruption, it exponentially rewards the T-shape over the I-shape.
It does. Tillman uses several high-profile examples, but let's look at the mechanics using a more relatable case from the sources.
Okay, yeah.
We have the example of an accountant who spent 8 grueling years in corporate finance, analyzing ledgers for a massive logistics firm. Then, at 35, she completely abandons finance to launch a sustainable, direct-to-consumer fashion brand.
And to an old-school recruiter, she just threw away a decade of compounding experience to start at the absolute bottom of the fashion industry.
Exactly. But that analysis is entirely flawed because it assumes skills are isolated silos.
Right.
Her time in corporate finance built a robust horizontal crossbar. When she enters the fashion space, she isn't competing against other finance people, she's competing against other creative designers.
And most apparel entrepreneurs have a deep vertical in textile design or branding, but they completely lack the analytical rigor required to survive the business side.
But our former accountant brings an ironclad grasp of unit economics to the table.
Let's define unit economics for the listener, just because it really proves the power of the T-shape. Most creatives know how to make a beautiful, organic cotton dress. But this accountant understands exactly how to calculate customer acquisition cost against the lifetime value of that customer.
She knows how to model inventory turnover ratios, manage cash flow cycles, and optimize gross margins down to the cent.
And those are horizontal skills. She applies a finance framework to a creative industry, creating a hybrid advantage that a purely linear designer simply cannot replicate.
Tillman points out that the most impactful leaders in the world actually follow this non-linear pattern. Tim Cook did not spend his life in the CEO training pipeline.
Right, he worked in industrial engineering, then operations, then supply chain management.
He built a massive horizontal crossbar that allowed him to see the entirety of Apple's ecosystem in a way a pure product designer never could.
Oprah Winfrey is another great example. She went from local news anchor to talk show host to media executive to acting coach.
Those varied experiences are not detours, they are the raw materials for innovation.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second because the logic of the T-shaped professional sounds bulletproof in a vacuum. But in the actual marketplace, hiring managers use algorithms and keyword scanners.
True.
So if you're continually pivoting, collecting disparate skills, don't you run the very real risk of appearing like a dilettante? If you jump from finance to fashion to tech, Aren't you just going to look like a flighty job hopper who can't commit to a vertical?
That is a legitimate friction point in the current hiring landscape, I'll give you that. But it requires a fundamental shift in how we view risk and resilience. Linear thinkers optimize for a stable environment, they build fragile careers.
And a fragile career is highly optimized for one specific set of conditions.
Yes. So if an I-shaped copywriter spends 20 years optimizing for writing SEO blog posts and an AI model suddenly commoditizes that exact skill, that career breaks permanently.
It shatters.
Exactly. Non-linear thinkers, on the other hand, build what the author Nassim Taleb calls anti-fragility.
Anti-fragility. And that goes beyond mere resilience, correct? Because resilience means you survive a shock and return to baseline.
Right. Anti-fragility means the system actually requires volatility and stress to grow stronger.
Right. So a portfolio, career one, built on diverse intersecting skills actually benefits from chaos. When an industry shifts, the anti-fragile professional doesn't break. They recombine their horizontal skills into a new vertical.
Your scattered resume is not evidence of a lack of commitment. It is documented proof of high-level adaptability. The burden is just on the individual to narrate that T-shape effectively to the marketplace, rather than expecting a keyword scanner to do the connecting for them.
And that transition from optimization to anti-fragility requires action. Which brings us to the centerpiece of our deep dive today, the groundbreaking research of Herminia Ibarra on working identity.
This is where it gets really practical.
Yeah. Because if we accept that a nonlinear path is superior and we commit to avoiding the sunk cost fallacy, we still face the terrifying reality of a blank slate. How do you figure out what the next step actually is? Our societal default is to rely on what Ibarra calls the plan and implement model.
And the plan and implement model is deeply embedded in the self-help and career counseling industries.
It's everywhere.
The premise is that your true self, or your perfect career, is this hidden, static entity buried somewhere inside your psyche.
Right, like a buried treasure.
Yes. So the prescribed methodology is to sit in a quiet room, take a battery of personality tests, engage in deep introspection, discover this true self, draft a meticulous 5-year plan, and then execute it sequentially.
And Ibarra's longitudinal research demonstrates that this method has an incredibly high failure rate for major life transitions. It fails because it relies on a fundamental misunderstanding of how human identity actually works.
You cannot excavate a future identity through introspection because that identity does not exist yet.
As the text quotes from Richard Pascal, adults are far more likely to act their way into a no way of thinking than to think their way into a new way of acting. Identity is not a dormant seed. It is a byproduct of behavior and environment.
Because introspection operates within the boundaries of your existing mental models. If you only know the corporate law environment, your introspection will only generate variations of a corporate law career.
Right. So Ibarra proposes this radical alternative called the test and learn method.
Instead of planning a massive, high-stakes leap, you engage in the rapid prototyping of what she calls possible selves.
A possible self being a hypothetical image of who you might become. And the only way to evaluate a possible self is to physically inhabit it through small, low-risk experiments.
Let's look at the case studies from Ibarra's research because they illustrate the mechanics of this beautifully. We have the story of Ben.
Ben, the tenured academic professor who felt a creeping sense of stagnation.
Right. So if he had used the plan and implement model, he would have spent a year agonizing over a spreadsheet, quit his job in a grand gesture, and immediately launched a nonprofit.
Which carries a catastrophic risk of failure because it is entirely based on untested assumptions about what running a nonprofit is actually like.
Exactly. So instead, Ben crafted an experiment. He started spending a few hours of his weekends consulting pro bono for an existing nonprofit.
This is crucial. He didn't just test his skills, he observed his own physiological and emotional responses to the environment. He noticed that the chaotic, hands-on operational work energized him significantly more than the solitary environment of academic publishing.
He gathered empirical data from reality rather than speculative data from his imagination.
And once he had a positive signal from that micro-experiment, he scaled it up. He took a 2-year sabbatical to act as a director for the nonprofit.
But he kept his safety net intact.
Right. He only fully resigned his professorship and closed the door after the hypothesis was definitively proven through sustained action.
We see the exact same methodology with Pierre, the psychiatrist. The desire to become a Buddhist monk seems like an absolute binary switch.
It does.
But Pierre did not simply walk away from his practice one afternoon. Over the course of years, he spent incrementally more time at a monastery. He facilitated workshops bridging psychiatry and mindfulness.
He slowly waded into the identity, testing the waters of the community, the routine, and the sacrifices involved. He allowed his old identity to slowly atrophy while the new one gained density.
And then there's Carol, the management consultant who wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Oh, the fantasy of entrepreneurship is so intoxicating, being your own boss, setting your own hours.
But the reality is usually dealing with server crashes and late invoices.
Yeah. Carol didn't burn her bridges to chase the fantasy. She built a small web-based business on the side, working evenings and weekends. She ran a controlled simulation to see if her temperament could actually handle the specific stress profile of a founder.
These experiments are vital because they puncture the romanticized visions we hold of other careers.
It's like trying to pick your favorite cuisine by reading a menu in your bedroom. You have to actually go to the restaurant and taste the food.
I love that analogy. To borrow a framework from the design world, which the sources highlight through the concept of Odyssey plans from the book Designing Your Life, you have to actively prototype the experience.
Let's break down the mechanics of an Odyssey plan, because it is a highly actionable tool for the listener. The premise is to force cognitive flexibility by sketching out three completely distinct alternative 5-year timelines for your life.
The structure is very specific.
Yeah.
Plan 1 is the default path. It is the trajectory you are currently on, projected out 5 years.
Okay. And Plan 2 forces you to pivot immediately. What would you do if the industry in Plan 1 completely vanished tomorrow through regulation or AI automation?
And Plan 3 removes resource constraints entirely. What would you do if money, social status, and image were completely irrelevant?
The value of Plan 3 isn't that you are actually going to drop everything and become a poet in Tuscany. The value is that it reveals the underlying values you are starving for.
Right. Maybe it highlights a deep need for autonomy or creative expression or working with your hands.
But the most critical part of the Odyssey Plan exercise comes after you write them down. You have to articulate these plans out loud to a carefully curated group of people.
And the rules of engagement for this sharing process are incredibly strict, and for good reason. You must present these nascent plans to individuals who will ask probing, expansive questions, but you must explicitly ban them from offering critique, logistical roadblocks, or unsolicited advice.
See, this goes against every instinct of a helpful friend. If I tell a close friend my plan 2 is to open an artisanal bakery, their immediate instinct is to protect me by pointing out that the failure rate for restaurants is 80%.
And the profit margins on sourdough are terrible.
Right. Why is that kind of practical feedback destructive at this stage?
Because a possible self in its infancy is incredibly fragile. The goal of sharing an Odyssey plan is not to secure venture capital funding. It is to gauge your own emotional resonance with the idea when it exists in the real world.
Got it.
If a friend immediately attacks the unit economics of the bakery, your brain shifts from an exploratory creative state into a defensive analytical state. The experiment is aborted before it begins.
So what's the correct response from a listener?
The correct response is, what specific part of the bakery concept excites you? How could we test a piece of that experience this weekend without spending any money?
So you're looking for a catalyst, not a consultant.
Precisely. The danger of trying to bypass this slow experimental phase is illustrated in the sources by the story of Susan Fontaine.
Oh, Susan. She was an MBA executive suffering from profound burnout. And she tried to execute a massive, sweeping pivot based on a theoretical plan she developed in her head.
Yeah, she took a new role at a different firm that she assumed would offer better balance, only to discover within weeks that she had just signed up for a different flavor of the exact same corporate grind.
Susan had failed to drop what Ibarra refers to as her rocks. These are the deeply embedded, untested assumptions we carry about our own worth and requirements.
She assumed she still needed a specific salary band to be happy. She assumed she needed a title that signaled success to her MBA cohort.
And because she didn't run small, disruptive experiments to test those assumptions, she unconsciously dragged all her old metrics of success into her new career attempt.
She changed the scenery, but she didn't change the underlying operating system.
Right. And to drop those rocks, you have to be willing to enter a very specific, highly uncomfortable psychological space. When you start testing these new possible selves and you begin detaching from your old identity, you enter what William Bridges calls the neutral zone.
The neutral zone is the period of liminality. In anthropology, a liminal space is the threshold between two distinct states of being.
You have let go of the trappings of your previous professional identity, but your new identity has not yet crystallized into reality.
It is a psychological void characterized by intense ambiguity, insecurity, and a profound sense of loss.
One of Ibarra's subjects, a woman named June, described the experience as living inside a hurricane.
It's intense.
I want to unpack the social friction of this space. When you are a marketing director and you go to a dinner party, the question, what do, is an easy lob. You have a socially validated script.
Right.
But when you are in the neutral zone, that same question induces panic. You stammer. You say, well, I used to be in marketing, but right now I'm exploring some consulting and maybe looking at urban agriculture.
You sound lost, and society is highly intolerant of adults who appear lost.
The societal pressure to have a coherent narrative is immense. Because of that pressure, the overwhelming instinct for anyone in the neutral zone is to rush for the nearest exit.
The anxiety of the void becomes so intolerable that people will grab the first familiar life raft they see, which almost always takes the form of a job identical to the one they just left.
They abort the transition just to relieve the psychological tension.
But the research is emphatic on this point. Diverge and delay. You must actively resist the urge to prematurely close the transition.
You have to willingly, as Ibarra states, get and stay lost for a while. The inner work of dismantling those old assumptions, the rocks, can only happen in the crucible of the neutral zone. If you bypass the hurricane, you don't actually reinvent yourself.
Practically speaking, however, lingering in the void presents a massive logistical challenge.
Yeah, the mortgage still requires payment. The grocery bill doesn't pause for your existential transition.
This is where the strategy of exploit and explore becomes necessary.
Let's debate the reality of this, because exploit and explore essentially means managing dual identities, right? You exploit your existing legacy skills to generate reliable income. You keep the day job, or you take on freelance consulting in your old field.
And simultaneously, you use your margins of time, evenings, early mornings, weekends, to explore the new identity through your micro-experiments.
It is a deliberate compartmentalization of your energy. You view your legacy skills merely as a funding mechanism for your future self. But I have to push back on the sustainability of this model. We are talking about professionals who are already initiating a transition because they are burnt out. Now, the advice is to work a full-time job to pay the bills and then work a second, emotionally taxing exploration job on nights and weekends. Doesn't the exploit and explore model inherently lead to a physical and psychological collapse?
The risk of burnout is absolutely the most significant vulnerability of the model. That is exactly why the transition cannot be a solitary endeavor. If you attempt to sustain dual identities in isolation, you will exhaust your cognitive load. The research indicates that survival in the neutral zone depends entirely on how effectively you manage your social network during the transition.
And here we encounter one of the most counterintuitive and difficult findings in all the source material.
Yes, the warning about who you turn to for support.
When you are exhausted from exploiting and exploring, your natural instinct is to lean on your strongest ties, your spouse, your parents, your oldest friends. But the data suggests that these individuals, the ones who know you best, are frequently the most significant obstacles to your reinvention.
It sounds incredibly cynical, but it is rooted in systemic sociology, not malice. Every relationship operates on an established equilibrium. You fulfill a specific functional and emotional role in the lives of your family and friends.
And when you unilaterally decide to change your identity, you disrupt the equilibrium of their lives.
Furthermore, they suffer from typecasting. They have years of data categorizing you as the reliable corporate lawyer or the stressed-out sales rep.
So when you announce that you're exploring a pivot into landscape architecture, it violates their mental model of the world.
Their resistance is often cloaked in deep concern, though. They will highlight all the financial risks and point out how much you are throwing away, genuinely believing they are protecting you.
But functionally, they act as anchors. Their psychological comfort relies on you remaining exactly